Webinar, your connection will be muted. Please use the Q&A function for questions that will be screened for consideration, and use the chat function to communicate with other participants. We hope to get to as many of your questions as the time allows. Finally, our moderator for this evening is Brendan Sexton, member of the Manhattan SWAB, previously serving as our chair. Brendan also served as the city's Sanitation Commissioner during the latter years of the Koch administration, and has served in a variety of public and civic roles throughout his long career. Ladies and gentlemen, Brendan Sexton.
Hi, everybody. Is my mic working? Thank you. I haven't moderated a Zoom event before, so I don't know when I'm live or when you are. So I hope it all goes well, and if it doesn't, please blame Kathy. Thank you. I guess most of you will know that I was with the Department of Sanitation when Local Law 19, which created municipal recycling in New York City, was passed. And many of the issues we'll be discussing tonight would have been made much simpler if there was extended producer responsibility for products. We spent 10 or 20 years in this city trying to figure out how to recycle or compensate financially, usually compensate for the unrecyclability of so many products. At any rate, tonight we are going to discuss what perhaps in a better world would have been present in our city and in our recycling environment for a long time: extended producer responsibility. I assume people who have signed in for tonight, excuse the voice. I am, by the way, in the very last stages of recovering from COVID, so that's what it sounds like. I assume, or I hope it's not unsafe to assume, that people have some familiarity with the idea of extended producer responsibility. It is known to most of us and enjoyed by, at least in New York, none of us, and it would change completely the way we, well, it claims so much: manufacturing, distribution, and especially reuse, recycling, capture of the material. There are several models of this. They're mostly national, not municipal. But the EU is, for instance, the best known example of governmental and social units that have gone pretty far in the direction of producer responsibility. But we are, in America, host to, well, I'll start with in North America, we have one country just to the north of us, which is further along with EPR than are we. And we have, I'll introduce in a moment, a representative from Canada who can tell us about that. But also within the United States, there are some states, for instance, Oregon, that have gone further along these lines than others. Oregon has a notion of shared responsibility, and California is now looking at various EPR alternatives. There is something absolutely brilliant and fine and satisfying about the logic of producer responsibility, but the actualities of implementing it have so far defeated us in this country. But if we can get the Electoral College to vote for the people they were supposed to, and we did, then nothing else could daunt us, right? We can do anything. So tonight we will talk about EPR in general. We'll also hear about a bill in this state. Senator Kaminsky has introduced a bill, S7718, as now being discussed, ready for consideration. We have with us his staff who actually, well, he probably doesn't allow her to say this, but drafted the bill. Just to be frank, this is the first of the SWAB's hosting of EPR discussions, but there are, over the next decade or more, going to be many, many discussions. This is the future of waste management, I think, in the industrialized world. The notion that you should produce stuff you don't really need as much of as you thought, and send it to everybody's house, and then they do stuff with it, like put ketchup in it, and then you go back and collect it and somehow clean it and recycle it is, if we have a minute to think about it, a very clumsy way to do. So if we can instead find ways, of course, to reduce the production of the waste in the first place, or second of all, to help with the very expensive process of recapturing and so on. And this also goes to questions of environmental pollution other than just simple recycling. What chemicals, et cetera, are in those products become much more interesting when you realize when you propose that the manufacturer who put the chemicals in that product has to take it back and figure out how to handle it. Cadmium red looks like a beautiful pigment until you have to collect it by thousands of tons and do something with it. So here we are. Let me tell you who the speakers are tonight. And then I don't, even though I'm moderator, I don't control the muting or unmuting, etc. Kathy, are people just to raise their hand? Well, we'll have the presentations. I actually think it is better not to have your questions yet, although if very important, you can raise your hand during them. We'll have a minute or two between speakers. If something was misheard or something like that, we can clarify. But then we'll have question and answer at the end. We'll have 8 or 10 minutes for each presenter. And then we'll have more than that for everybody's Q&A. But again, raise your hand or whatever, because it's up to the extensive and expensive and sophisticated technical crew we have here managing this event, helping us to manage this event, to know when to mute or unmute the questioners. Okay, first of all, the first presenter is Tom Outerbridge. I think this is the wrong word. The Manhattan Swab knows Tom well, I believe. He was, for one thing, a member of the Manhattan Swab for many, many years. He was recycling staff of the Department of Sanitation when I was at the Department of Sanitation, but he's not as old as I am. He is now the general manager of Sims Municipal Recycling. Most of you know of their quite remarkable and handsome MRF in Brooklyn, which also is home to, and this was Tom's achievement, as I believe is true, the only privately funded industrial scale, commercial scale wind turbine in New York. And that was Tom's initiative. So it's easy to find the place is what I was getting to. If you get to Brooklyn and you look up and you see a wind turbine, that's the Sims MRF. So much of what we think of as, at least in the East Coast, as municipal collection and sorting and processing of material and reselling it is based on what Tom has done or is doing. Second speaker is our neighbor from the north, David Pierce. He is executive director of the Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance, and EPR is a form of material stewardship. We all think that sustainability requires us to be better stewards. Responsibility for the waste stream is where it starts or should start. David works in Ontario, British Columbia, and elsewhere in Canada, and he has a very broad and deep understanding of EPR in North America, especially since he's been there as it has begun and is working out in Canada. Excuse me. Third, Ashley Doherty. She is legislative director for State Senator Kaminsky from Long Island, who chairs the Senate Committee on Environmental Conservation and is a friend of us in the waste management field. And with the senator and Kathy, Ashley working together, they have created the first New York draft of a bill. I think that Ashley will not be able to share with us the exact text of the bill, but we'll find out that soon. And finally, Kate Kirchner, who's Chief of Staff for the Bureau of Recycling and Sustainable at the organization which is usually considered the most competent branch of city government, the New York Department of Sanitation. Kate earned a master's degree in energy and environmental policy from the University of Delaware, which is why she's the president-elect's friend. And she oversees a great deal of sanitation and waste prevention and recycling especially. And along with Tom, Kate is a member of the New York Product Stewardship Council on behalf of the department. She represents the department there. So we'll go over to the presenters in just a minute, but I do want to remind you that there is translation available and you will get a chance for your questions. We can, if there's an important understanding or some clarification that's desperately needed, we can certainly have your question or clarification between the speakers, but you'll be expected in general to save it for the finishing, the end of the fourth speaker, Kate. And I think that's it. Oh, great and vaunted technical staff. Do you take over now so we can get to Tom? This is why we should all meet in person around a campfire somewhere, because technology doesn't work.
Okay, well, before Tom starts speaking, I'm going to make a quick announcement.
Okay.
Saludo. Interpretación hablada en español está disponible para los asistentes a la sesión de Zoom únicamente. Para establecer el servicio, por favor, diríjase al menú de Zoom. En una computadora, seleccione el mapa mundi o globo terráqueo a la derecha. En una tableta o teléfono inteligente, seleccione el econo más o los 3 puntos. Luego seleccione Language Interpretation o Interpretación de idioma español del menú que aparece. Gracias.
Thank you, Kathy. What language was that?
Spanish with a little bit of Italian.
Maybe. Okay. Are we technically ready for Tom yet? We can skip directly to David if we want to, if that's better. Can someone instruct me, please?
Oh, Brendan, would you skip to David, please?
Okay.
Super.
So as you just heard from me, David Pierce comes to us from Ontario. Well, he's from the Canadian Stewardship Council, and he works mostly in Ontario, but also in British Columbia and elsewhere in Canada. And they have, in fact, taken several steps ahead of us on EPR. David, let's see how it goes. Take it over.
All right, Brendan, thank you.
That worked. Thank you.
It works. Okay, fantastic. And now step 2 is, can I share a screen with everybody? And I'm just trying that, and I'm hoping someone will indicate whether they can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, oh, I got a thumbs up. Okay, well, that's good.
Yep.
Fantastic. So wonderful. Thank you for having me. And I'll do my best to speak American English instead of Canadian English. I think we're pretty similar on those. So I am the Managing Director of Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance. I'll share very briefly about who we are, what we do, and give a bit of an overview of what's happening across the country with respect to EPR. If I still have any time left at the end of that, then I'll touch on a few of the things that we find to be effective elements of EPR programs. And of course, you probably are quite familiar with the benefits that extended producer responsibility brings about. So who are we? Well, we're a not-for-profit created by producers in 2013. We have a mandate to provide a harmonized experience for producers that participate in EPR programs across the country. We provide services to 4 packaging and paper programs, as well as 2 hazardous and special waste programs. We are active in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. Now, you probably know Quebec also has an EPR program. It's not one that is under our umbrella and we provide services to, but is a program that we are in regular contact with. One of our founding mandates is to provide a harmonized experience for producers as they interact with these EPR programs across the country, despite regulatory differences. Our goal is to streamline things for the producers and make it so that they don't really need to know the complexities of each of those and the nuances of each of those programs. Just very quickly at the federal level, you may have heard of the Ocean Plastics Charter, and that's something that our government has outlined their plan for meeting through the Canada-wide Action Plan for Zero Plastic Waste. In that plan, they have identified EPR as a necessary tool to address the plastic pollution problem and for creating a circular economy. And so they're looking at different elements of policy at the federal level. One of the things we're expecting is there'll be some kind of standard around EPR for plastics that will need to be then implemented at the provincial level. Just going across the country, giving an update of what's happening where. As I mentioned, there are 5 of our 10 provinces with EPR for packaging today. We've got 10 provinces, 3 territories. 4 of the 5 with programs today have some form of cost sharing or a split between one party being producers paying for the cost of the program and the municipalities in Quebec being responsible for the operations. One of the programs in BC is a full producer responsibility model where producers have both the operational and financial responsibility. So I'll just start on the East Coast and kind of move west from there and tell you what's happening. There are 4 provinces on the East Coast, the Atlantic or Maritime provinces, in which there are currently discussions about implementing a producer responsibility model. They are looking at a full producer responsibility model. And when I say that, just to clarify, that means operational and financial responsibility, like in British Columbia. So that's what the Atlantic provinces are looking at. And we expect that the first regulation, the first draft, will come out in early 2021. Quebec has a program today. It is, as I said, one where businesses pay 100% of the costs, but they don't have any operational responsibility. That has remained with municipalities. The Quebec government is now looking to move to a full producer responsibility model, which would standardize how or what is collected and bring some economies of scale to the province and provide some relief to municipalities on the operating side. In Ontario, we've had EPR programs since 2004. Businesses pay 50% of best practice cost. It is, like Quebec, a bit of a fragmented system with different materials being collected in different parts of the province. There is a performance target in Ontario of 60%. The performance against that target has been declining as additional complicated materials are coming in and the loss of newsprint. Ontario is moving to what we call an individual producer responsibility model, where rather than a program being responsible to meet targets, individual producers will have obligations under the regulation to meet management targets and provide accessibility. We expect that in Ontario, there will be multiple producer responsibility organizations that are competing for business for producers and delivering compliance services. The municipalities will begin transitioning over in 2023, and it'll be a 3-year transition, after which producers will be fully responsible for delivering recycling services. In Manitoba and Saskatchewan, we also have cost sharing programs, 80% and 75% of costs respectively. Each of those provincial governments have signaled that they also want to move to a full producer responsibility model and are expected to put discussion papers out in early 2021 to begin the consultation process. We've recently been made aware that Alberta is also intending to implement EPR, and they will go directly to a full producer responsibility model. looking to get the discussion paper out there also early next year. And then British Columbia, they launched their program in 2014, and that has gone through one program plan renewal already. And I'll just take a moment and share with you some of the highlights, the achievements of that particular program. The performance has been very strong. And one of the things that we've been very fortunate to have in BC is stable markets in the face of the China sword action and COVID impacts. Recycle BC has not had any trouble placing its materials for processing and getting them back into the economy. And that's been a very big blessing, and partly achieved or largely achieved because of the scale of the program. The recovery rate has each year surpassed the regulated target of 75%. There are now material specific targets in place, and the program is seeing year-over-year performance improvements. So 3.5% increase in plastics recovery year-over-year, currently sitting at 46% of plastics being recovered against a 50% target, which needs to be reached in 2025. And I know 46% still shows a long way to go, but when we compare that to other jurisdictions, doing quite well in terms of what's being recovered, and 99% of that is being processed in the province. We've got a low contamination rate in BC, supported by a common promotion and education campaign that is visible across the entire province. All residents are able to recycle the same items, no matter where they live. And that has led to, in part, the reduction in contamination, but also performance improvements. We have a strong working relationship with the First Nations communities. There's a partnership with other EPR programs for different types of products, where there's an ambassador that works with the First Nations communities and helps them secure participation in those different programs. This year, for the first time, we'll be reporting the greenhouse gas emission impact of the program, and that'll be in the annual report. So just very quickly, because I think I'm approaching my time, some of the core principles that we've developed over the years, we found that where producers are responsible both financially and operationally, there's the greatest environmental impact and the ability to get economies of scale. We think it's important that there's always convenient and ready access for residents and consumers to interact with recycling services. I believe there needs to be a level playing field for businesses that are participating. So no free riders, everyone pays their fair share, but we do recognize that small businesses often need some additional support. In some cases, the smallest should be exempted. The cost of their participation is greater than any contribution that they would make financially to the system. Each material should pay its own way. So you don't want glass paying for plastic or plastic paying for paper. So we've established fee setting methodologies that are used by all of our programs to allocate costs to materials fairly. And those were developed in consultation with the producer community. And we also believe that competition in the waste management industry is very important. That is important for that sector to remain healthy. It's also important for producers in ensuring that they are able to achieve their obligations by accessing the latest in technology and innovation and getting good prices. And we believe there are roles for different stakeholders. So just very quickly, government setting policy objectives, outcomes-based objectives, and approving plans. We see a role for municipalities to provide services as collectors where they wish to, and to make their infrastructure and assets available to producers for a fee, and for producers to take the lead in developing programs.
David,
yes, am I out of time? Do I need to wrap up?
About to, but I just, before we get to that, would you repeat that last part again about producers?
Yes.
Integration with the rest of the system? Thank you.
Yeah, we believe that producers should take the lead on developing the program. So where the government sets the policy objectives, that the business community then develops the plan for how it is that they're going to meet those outcomes and objectives, and that they be given latitude to do that and bring to the table all the creativity that they do in their normal business operations.
And this is happening now? This is not just aspirational? This is how
Yep.
it's ordered to be said and so
Yeah,
on?
this is happening now. So each of those programs I talked about have a board of directors with producers on that board, and that board is overseeing and approving the program plans that are being submitted into the governments or to the oversight authorities, as the case may be, outlining how it is that producers will fulfill their obligations under the regulations.
Very good. And we will move on to the next, but just who pays for all that?
It's paid for by the producers.
Terrific. Okay, I think that we did have a little bit. Thank you, David, very much, and stick around. There'll be lots of
My
questions.
pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, and we will have some changes in order. We did have Tom's technical difficulty, but I think is Kathy ready? I think we'd like to perhaps go to Kathy and hear about Senator Kaminsky's bill. Is that okay? Kathy, are you around?
I'm here, but Ashley will be.
Oh, Ashley, yes, that's a very interesting.
I mean, I'll get out. Yeah, hold on.
I'm sorry, very interesting experiment in psychological something or other, because your picture came up as I was looking for the name, and so I said Kathy, you said Ashley. At any rate, Ashley is, New York State may become a real leader here, because it's possible we will actually have a state level EPR bill and then program. And it's due to the work of Ashley and her boss, State Senator Kaminsky from Long Island. So you don't need to hear from me. She's the one who drafted the bill, or they are. And I'd like, now, Ashley, did I understand that you were asking this part not to be recorded, or did I?
Yes, please.
Right, so this bill is still in formation, and rather than allow for embarrassing somebody somewhere, this part of the session will not be recorded. Go
But the
ahead.
bill is live, and I put the bill into the chat if anyone wants to look directly at the text, but I will get my screen up now.
Chat, if that's possible, thank you. Again, Ashley, thank you very much. Can I ask, is the order now to go, are we going to go to Tom now is the big question for Brendan. Kathy nods her head, thank you. Tom Outerbridge, I already introduced, and anyway, many of you already know Tom. He was a member of this organization, this group for a while, and runs the SIMS program operation he runs SIMS Municipal Recycling, but the operation in Brooklyn, which many of you have visited, and also, of course, have a place in Jersey City. But at any rate, Tom, would you want to jump in now?
Sure. Can you hear me, Brendan?
Yes, we hear you fine.
So I guess I'm, can you see my screen?
No, I don't. You see Ashley's A.
Do not see my
Kara will show your presentation. Just
My
let her know when
slides?
to turn next. Yes.
Oh, sure. Kara.
Hey, it looks like it's going. There we go.
Oh, fine. Hey, Brendan. So I'm very sorry I've participated, like probably a lot of people, in thousands of Zoom meetings, it seems like, in the last 6 months. And for some reason, this was asking for passwords and things that I were way beyond my capacity. So Amy has finally got me on here, and I'm sorry I'm late.
Yeah.
I was first on the agenda because I think I was meant to sort of give the broadest overview of what is EPR. So now that you've heard a great more detail from people like Ashley, and then I probably can go quite quickly through some of these slides and maybe give some little context to where we in the sort of recycling advocacy community have been, what we've been working on to get up to this point today. Kara,
Yes,
can you?
and
Yeah.
you, of course, are the one handling the materials here in New York. So your perspective, even if you think that most people have already heard this evening on EPR, your perspective on any and all of it would be very valuable.
All right, Kara, can you advance the next slide? So just very broadly, the EPR and concept where you're looking at, as you said, you're assigning some or all of the responsibility for our products, what happens to it at the end of life, to the producers, whether that be financial responsibility or logistical responsibility, public education. And these laws also tend to try to encourage or build in either recycling goals or recycling requirements, recyclability, and so forth. And the idea here is, if you think of waste management or recycling as a public service, you're trying to basically insulate that from the annual budget cycle that local municipalities have to go through. We all know that public education is a massive undertaking, and to have programs change because budgetary requirements dictate that on the part of localities, you're trying to basically disassociate this recycling service from that tax base to the extent possible. There's the next slide, Kara. And so the EPR is not new, right? In New York, we have many EPR laws. EPRs there's EPR, and people can argue about how well some of them work. I think some work quite well, and some have more issues to be worked out. But these are all materials that there is some form of producer responsibility, whether it be the bottle bill, where distributors are responsible for taking back bottles, rechargeable batteries, retailers are responsible to have drop-off locations for rechargeables, and so on. And paint is one of the newer ones. I believe Ashley and the Senate were very involved in the paint law that passed last year. And that will put the onus on the paint manufacturer. I'm not familiar with all the details, but I believe on the paint manufacturers to set up paint collection points and recycling programs for paint. Elsewhere in the US, you have EPR laws for mattresses, solar panels, pharmaceuticals, and packaging, which is what we're talking about now, is it's almost universal, maybe not quite, but almost universal across Western Europe and very widespread in Canada. And as you've heard, it's now under consideration in many states. Maine, I think, was very close to passing the law last spring, and then sort of COVID interrupted all kinds of legislative activity, but it's back on the main docket as well this year. Vermont is quite far along in their bill, as is Oregon. Go to the next slide, Kara. So there are a lot of different ways that EPR, there's a lot of different elements to EPR programs, and you probably heard that about Canada, and you heard some detail from Ashley. I mean, how materials or how fees are allocated, how the programs are structured, what exact incentives are in the law for recyclability or recycled content. One of the key things that, well, I should say, the work that I did on this was associated with the New York Product Stewardship Council, and that it consists of representatives from across the state, generally for the most part public sector, county, and solid waste authority officials responsible for local recycling programs. And one of the key variables in how these EPR programs are set up is, in some cases, the producer takes all responsibility for actually setting up and running the program. And in other cases, the municipalities have the opportunity to be reimbursed. They continue to run the programs, and they have the opportunity to be reimbursed by the producers. And because of the way New York is set up, it's not as though there are not recycling programs in New York. There are recycling programs with many decades of history. As you know, Brendan, in New York, you have public collection fleets. In New York, obviously, Department of Sanitation, they're going to start plowing snow. They're not going to give up that collection fleet over to a producer-run program. So there's a lot of, you have Westchester and Rockland County both have their own MRFs built with their solid waste authority dollars. So we thought it was very important that this EPR program for packaging offer municipalities the opportunity to maintain their programs and be reimbursed if they chose to. Go to the next slide. This is also a slightly older slideshow, but anyway. Oh, this is it.
That's all she wrote.
Oh, so this is funny. This is an older slide presentation rather than the one I sent. So let me just say, if I could, then just before wrapping this up, you heard that we spent more than a year with the Product Stewardship Council and the New York Product Stewardship Council and the Product Stewardship Institute, which is a national organization, looking at EPR laws from really all across the world, trying to select elements that we thought were most applicable given New York's specific situation. And I'm happy to say I think that much of what we thought made sense for New York is contained in the Kaminsky bill. And over the particularly last winter, when this bill was being produced, was being drafted or being brought to the floor in Albany, we spent a lot of time with a wide array of environmental groups and solid waste authorities, the New York League of Conservation Voters, NRDC, environmental advocates, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, all of whom basically got on board with the idea of packaging, EPR for packaging, again, as a way to decouple this basic municipal recycling service from the commodity markets, which, as we all know, everyone's sort of suffering from today. And that's it.
That's good. That's perfectly on time too. Thank you. I want to point out how much of Tom's presentation used the word packaging. We think of EPR as focusing on the product and its recyclability or its toxicity or et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is, for most consumers, your waste consists of the stuff the product arrived in. And who was it? Was it Ashley who talked about she could barely, an Amazon package, which had packaging, stuffing in it, and then another package, another box. That is something EPR has to tackle. Nobody else has figured out. I thought we should have a local law in New York City that anything sold within the city of New York had to be at least 50% product. But I don't know how you'd actually do that. Okay, so thank you, Tom. We have one more presenter, and it's Kate Kitchener, another former colleague of mine, Tom's at the Department of Sanitation. And Kate is New York City's leading expert on exactly what we're talking about now, product sustainability and so on. And it's a pleasure to have you here, Kate. Go ahead and jump in.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Oops. Okay, great. So, and I think, Brendan, you really hit the nail on the head at the very beginning when you talked about the implementation, right? So that's really what I'm going to talk about is how EPR laws are implemented, particularly in New York State and New York City. And so with EPR, the devil really is in the details. And, you know, I definitely agree that Senator Kaminsky has really put together a strong bill here. And as Tom mentioned, I'm also on the New York Product Stewardship Council, and we partnered with the Product Stewardship Institute to really take a deep look at this, a deep dive for a year, and think a lot about how this could work in New York. So very exciting time for EPR. So as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of existing EPR bills in New York already. So I want to just talk about how they work, and that'll give you a little bit of a sense how something for packaging might work. So a few examples here: rechargeable batteries, mercury thermostats, electronics, paint, and refrigerants. So I'm going to go into each of those just to give you a sense of how they work in New York City. So for rechargeable batteries, every store that sells rechargeable batteries in New York is required to take them back for recycling. So you might have seen these boxes around, and the stewardship organization is called Call to Recycle. And so this is really putting the onus, a lot of the work is on the retailer here because they're having to actually manage the material. So that's kind of an interesting model. With mercury thermostats, any person, HVAC contractor, demolition contractor, is required to recycle their mercury thermostats. Here, the here, the stewardship organization, you can find places to drop them off at thermostatrecycle.org. So that's another example. That's a New York State law. And then electronics might be the one that you all are most familiar with. So some EPR laws require a disposal ban. So in the case of electronics, that is the situation. And so it's illegal to put electronics in the trash in New York State. And we have been very lucky in New York City to have a no-cost contract to manage our electronics. We have a vendor, ERI, that is funded by manufacturers to recycle the electronics that we collect from residents through our programs. And so that is a really amazing piece of legislation. We actually, we can't tie this directly to the law, but through our programs, we've seen a 60% reduction in the waste stream of electronics. So that's really the power of EPR laws, and kind of an exciting example for New York that we've seen. And then paint is another one that's exciting that's coming up. So this law passed, it was signed by the governor last December. Due to COVID, it's a little bit delayed, but we're expecting implementation in the fall of 2021. And here the stewardship organization is called Paint Care. It's a national organization. It's in several states already. I think it's in about 9 states. So New York is going to join that group. And Paint Care is going to offer drop-off sites throughout the city and obviously the whole state, because it's a state law. Where the public can take their unwanted paint for recycling. And if you want to learn more about this law and how it's going to work in New York, you can go to paintcare.org, and there's a little New York button. Just click on that. You can learn a little bit more how it's going to work here. Refrigerants is a really unique and amazing law a lot of people don't know about. This is a New York City specific EPR law. Generally, EPR laws are at the state level. They're not at the city level because, businesses and industry, they really don't want a patchwork of a million different laws that they have to follow. It's very complicated. And you could even say that it might be even more powerful to have some EPR laws at the federal level. You saw that with emission standards for vehicles, that really was much more powerful to have something all the way across the country. And also industry prefers that because it's simpler for them to follow, one law rather than 100. And so, this law is very unique though, and I'm sure if any of you have tried to get rid of your refrigerator or air conditioner, you have gone through this process, but you can call 311 or go to nyc.gov/CFC to make an appointment for pickup. And this has been a really amazing program. Since its inception in 2015, DSNY has billed manufacturers close to $2 million for the collection of these devices. So this is, again, a really great example of just how powerful EPR can be. But again, like I said, it's figuring out all the details of the implementation. And that's really where myself and my team come in with a lot of these laws for New York City. And then obviously, as we've been talking about all night, I assumed by the time you got to me, you guys would kind of know the deal with the packaging. So I won't go too deep into it here, but just to be clear and I'll speak for New York City here. Obviously, this will be different around the state, but DSNY would continue to manage the city's waste. We have a very strong municipal union in New York City, and we would not plan to change that system. So we would expect to go with more of a reimbursement model. And then, as Ashley said, the PRO would be providing statewide education and outreach. But of course, every municipality has its own details. So they would have to coordinate with local jurisdictions on messaging. There's a possibility that we would streamline, the whole state recycling the same products, but that has pluses and minuses. In New York City, we're very lucky to be partnered with SIMS that has very advanced technology. And so that's been, we're able to recycle a lot more things than maybe some smaller, more rural communities can. And as far as EPR goes, for the regular resident, unless you are, a garbage dork like I am, or like most of you on the swab, You wouldn't really know all these details and weeds. You would just put your recycling out like you normally do. You wouldn't even notice any difference. It's really on the back end where it's really benefiting the municipalities. So benefits of EPR. And Ashley mentioned a bunch of these too, which is great, but it reduces the burden on municipal budgets, which obviously in this current climate is really important. This is a time where the city is looking for revenue. The state is looking for revenue. We are in a very tough budget situation. I'm sure many of you seen that a lot of our programs got cut this year. So having an EPR law would be great for New York City and New York State, just to get some of the burden removed from municipalities and back on the manufacturers who kind of bring these products into our cities and our state. You know, the other benefit of EPR, and I think this has been talked about a little bit, is that it can drive more sustainable packaging design by engaging manufacturers in the end life of their products. So they're, you know, responsible for not just making the product, but where does it go at the end of their life? And once they have that responsibility, that, you know, encourages them to make a more sustainable product, a more recyclable product at the beginning. And finally, it really can drive markets for recycled content. You know, a lot of EPR laws have requirements for the post-consumer recycled content, which is what we really need, because as long as oil is cheap and virgin plastic is cheap, it's really hard to get people to make products with recycled content packaging. And so this is a great way to incentivize that as well. And I think that's all I had. Thank you guys so much for having me. Really excited to be having this discussion. Oh, the one thing I would end with is that we really need a new name for EPR. It is just the most unfriendly word. Like, no one is gonna, the fact you have to explain it, that it's not good. We need a new term. So I'll put that challenge out to the group here to come up with a simpler term for you know, just the guy on the street to understand what it is. But
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Good point. Thank you. And by the way, you kept well within the time. Everybody, all the panelists kept within the time. Just terrific. Really appreciate it. We do have questions and answers collected. I think Cullen and Kendall are going through the questions. I'm going to present one or two of them now, or am I to do this?
No, you're right. Thanks, Brendan, and thanks for all the speakers. It was terrific. And we do have about 25 minutes or so left for questions, and we'll start with a hybrid of those that have came in before the webinar tonight and some that have been posted as well. David, you're still with us?
David.
I am.
Good.
Sorry,
good.
I got my video going again.
That's okay. Good. So, and I'll start mine too.
To Canada before the snow comes.
I'll start mine too. David, a couple quick questions for you. One is about harmonization across provinces. Do PROs in Canada solely exist within a province, or are there any that operate across?
Yeah, the PROs are at the provincial level. So unlike what we see in Europe, where there would be national programs being operated, it is at the provincial level. And then that's where CSSA comes in, and we're able to provide that national perspective and view into the programs on behalf of the producers.
Okay. The second is about product design and innovation. What have you seen any examples of where EPR systems have generated some innovation in product design and minimization of packaging?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, you know, we look at the circular economy and the different activities in the circular economy, and we look at EPR policy, and we look at design for environment and recycled content standards, and we sort of think about how all those different pieces fit together. And EPR is really about, in our view anyway, making sure that the material can be captured at the curb when the consumer's done with it and get it into a repurpose ready state so it can go back into the design and manufacturing process. Now that said, the design for environment aspect, which kind of comes after the collection of that material or before it's first disposed of, there are influences that EPR and recycling programs can have because the brand owners want to make sure that their materials can be recycled, that they're going to be collected and they're going to be sorted and processed and be put back into the circular economy. And so as you introduce a standard set of materials that are collected at every household, that sends a really strong signal to the producer community about what types of packaging they should be putting on the market if they want to meet their internal sustainability objectives. But as for things like the recycled content and design for environment, we sort of put those in the bucket of a different element of circular economy policies and standards. But we are starting to see the overlap, as we just heard about this evening. We're starting to see some of that overlap into the EPR policies as well. And so, there's different views about, where that should sit in circular economy EPR bills. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing some changes where there'll be a shift from a particular type of packaging, a particular plastic resin into another, because the brand owner wants it to be acceptable at the curb.
So my third question, and then I'll turn to Cullen. So Cullen, you can get a question or two ready. Is another overlap issue, and it's about issues of equity. If we were having this discussion a year or two ago, it would not have been as front and center an issue as it is in 2020 now. You mentioned the work in BC with First Nations, obviously a big issue across Canada. But how have equity issues ranging from job creation opportunities to the role for canners and binners in cities where that's an opportunity for people? How have those issues now sort of been integrated into the EPR discussions and practices?
Yeah, I don't know if they're sort of at the forefront or a major part of the discussions, but the binners example is an interesting one. In BC, there's a deposit return program for beverage containers. So those containers fall outside of EPR. They're being managed through the pre-existing deposit system. But the wide standing practice is that that the bins on the streets are designed in a way that can provide ready access to any of those beverage containers that are left behind. When we're sort of thinking about equity issues, we're thinking about making sure all residents have access to recycling services. We're thinking about all businesses paying their proportionate and fair share of the costs. But there are those social considerations as well. And, we see some examples in the waste management industry where there'll be employment of, different individuals with, different skill sets or challenges. And those are employment decisions that are made by the service providers, not by the programs. The programs themselves tend to have very minimal staff. They are outsourcing the delivery of the waste management services to the private sector and to municipalities that wish to continue to participate. And so the opportunity to be a part of those sorts of discussions isn't there as much at the program level.
Okay. Colin, any questions you pulled out from the Q&A?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just, hopefully folks can hear me. I'll just pick up on that question, but maybe direct it to either Kate or Ashley about several questions that come in about folks who make their living, especially in New York City, by picking up cans or other recyclables. And the question was, number one, will this system still allow them to do that? I think the answer is yes, but you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. And then the second,
directly into your mic, Colin.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Right
Yes.
now, beautifully. Yes.
Okay, sorry. So that was the first question. The second question was, will there be further opportunities for them to collect other items that are not directly sort of, that they can return for a deposit? So will there be an expansion of that? I think the answer is no, but if you guys wanted to just answer that to make sure I'm correct.
The question, and maybe I missed part of the early part of your question, has to do with canners and whether there is a prospect for them. Is it more or less likely that the deposit system will persist
Correct.
in EPR, maybe even expand. What will
Correct.
happen with that part of the economy?
Yep.
Right. I can take that, and then maybe Ashley, you can jump in if I miss something, and maybe David, you could speak to how that's works in Canada now. But so currently, any material on the curb is the property of the Department of Sanitation, so it's technically illegal to take things off the curb. That said, the department really focuses on, you know, folks with motorized vehicles that have a route, that are highly organized, that are really moving a lot of material. So I would say that. Now, for the legislation that we're looking at, the bottle deposit is actually left outside of this legislation. So it's not considered covered by this bill. So I would say that too. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Well,
I can tack on to that. Yeah, the bottle bill is anything under the current deposit law, and it's just a reference directly to that area, is excluded from the EPR for paper and packaging bill. So that in no way would be impacting the deposits, you know, connected to the bottle bill right now.
good.
That would not exclude someone from you know, the canners and stuff who look to that.
Thank you. I think that question will come up very early and often as this bill moves toward public exposure and discussion. What else, Cullen or Kendall? What do we see in the question box?
I have a question about timing of not just adoption in the legislature, but mostly what happens after that in terms of the regulation development process, what role DEP plays, what the expectation is about how long that would take. David mentioned in passing that, you know, Ontario's now in this sort of 3-year transition period from EPR 1.0 to 2.0, or however that's characterized in Ontario. But what's the expectation here? And Ashley or Tom or Kate?
I can answer that. Weirdly enough, I have a slide prepared for this question in case we got it. I didn't know how in the weeds people really wanted us to go, but just going to put that up to help visualize because it's complex.
Thank you.
Ashley, some folks have asked, I think you spoke in your presentation about education materials. Are those available now?
These would be produced as part of the PRO plan. So
Okay.
those specifically are not, because the bill isn't law yet. So those would be part of, you know, the plan approved, and then it would be there. But I'm guessing, I would presume, I don't know if Kate would be able to speak if New York City has anything that they do. I know they're great on this topic, and they probably are leaders on this.
Absolutely. I encourage you to go to nyc.gov/sanitation to see all of our educational materials. We have a ton of stuff out there for free that you can order to your home.
Thank you. Good. Is there another question in the question box? Because
There's still a couple that we'll sort through here, Brendan. David, another one for you about how waste prevention is sort of factored into any of the PRO plans in any measurable sort of way. Can you comment on that?
yes, I want to chime in on that. Is it assumed that by making especially wasteful approaches, packages, products themselves pay for or handle their own mess, that this is a waste prevention or waste reduction strategy in itself?
I've heard discussion by different regulators about whether or not they would be looking to include something around waste reduction. We haven't seen it. What we see are targets around how much material needs to be collected. And so of a certain amount that is supplied, the target is in place, the producers need to collect and recycle enough of that material to meet the target and employ whatever means are necessary in order to do so. And so if that means expanding beyond curbside programs to providing collection points in other locations and making sure that they're picking up that material, that will be done. Some of the discussion around litter prevention tends to come back to the fact that there are decisions that are made by consumers about whether they're going to participate in the programs and infrastructure that's being made available by producers. And if there's a decision not to do that and to litter, the producer community has often said that that is something that goes beyond what is reasonable for them to be able to control when they are putting in the infrastructure. Now, I'm not commenting on, one way or the other, but I've seen studies about this, supporting either side. We haven't seen it. The focus in Canada is at this point transition programs, recycling programs over to producer responsibility, and producers are saying, we'll take that on, and they want to take it on sort of as is, transition the existing responsibilities of delivering those services to producers without complicating that transition with a number of additional elements. We start to see some of the litter management coming up in Europe, and that's after many, many, many years of these programs being in operation and maturing.
David, where do waste composition characterization studies enter into the planning process? That's a sort of a baseline benchmark for
yeah, well, they're really important in order to be able to measure performance, in particular where there might be material specific targets in place. And so, waste composition studies, post-sort, pre-sort, they're also, as you're all familiar with, doing studies, throughout at the curb and elsewhere to inform operational decisions. And so, what are the studies that are necessary to inform reporting against the obligations in the bill? What are the what's necessary just to inform efficiencies in operations? And so those will be approached differently by the PRO.
Helpful. Can I relate to a question that came in anonymously from somebody? Is that okay, Kendall?
Sure.
Someone just asked a question that I think is on the public's mind, certainly on mine, which is how can EPR help us reduce plastics in the waste stream entirely? Never mind which plastic, or is it packaging or is it the product? There is a good sense among the public, and this group and the waste management community generally deserve some credit for bringing this to the public's attention, that plastics are an issue from the moment they leave the oil well, and where they go and how they break down, etc. Does EPR relate to, or can EPR programs be designed so that it's actually related to the previous question on waste reduction, they lead to a net reduction in this material, period, no matter how it's handled? Is that the right goal to ask of an EPR program?
Is that directed to me, Brendan, or who's that directed
to? God, really. I was sitting here meditating on how to solve this problem, and if God is unavailable, jump in, David. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I think from an EPR theory perspective, that's certainly something that we see. Plastic plays an important role in packaging today and in products. Certain types of plastics, as Tom knows, are much easier to manage and recycle and find markets for than others. And so I think that there's opportunity through targets and through making sure that costs are being appropriately allocated, that signals can be sent. But an EPR program in itself is about making producers responsible to recover the resources when the consumer's done with them and get them back into a repurpose ready state. And so some of those other elements around, reduction, or, this resin's acceptable and that one's not, I think those are other policy decisions that I would suggest are important in the circular economy, not necessarily as part of EPR.
Kendall, could I add something? I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, Tom. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, in addition to my not being able to present, my video isn't working, but you can hear me. So to that question though, Brendan, I think very importantly, since we are looking at this as a way to not only drive better packaging design and recycled content, but really to support the cost of these programs that municipalities are struggling to bear right now. If you look at recycling program costs, people are hyper aware of plastics because they're in the ocean, right? And they're choking sea mammals and so forth, and horrible things. But the nuts and bolts costs of the recycling program are far more impacted by the collapsed paper markets, by the really challenging markets for glass. So certainly the bill that we sort of wanted was not singling out plastics, because it's really the host of separate problems perhaps associated with plastics, litter and so forth. But in terms of municipal recycling program costs, plastics are not unique from the other materials.
Thank you. So I think that the answer to the question there is essentially that is clearly a real issue for the waste stream and for waste management, for recycling, etc. But that EPR may not be the device that tackles the issue of the amount of plastic we're putting into the world. That's really the issue. And I think EPR may be able to help somewhat around the edges, but it's not at base meant to attack that issue.
Brendan, may perhaps just add to it, which is that under EPR and standardizing what's collected and putting appropriate performance targets in place means that more of that plastic is going to get collected and managed appropriately and put back into the economy, and stimulate investment to start dealing with some of the types of plastics that maybe are difficult to deal with on a local basis for some communities across your state and other states. So there can certainly be performance improvements in making sure that those resources are not lost to the environment or put into a landfill. And so that is a different conversation, I think, than about reducing source reduction. Both are important. What's the right policy mechanism and what's the right place for source reduction? And for that which is put on the market, how do you make sure that the processes are in place in order to collect and responsibly repurpose it?
Yes, that's the correct answer. But I think that the questioner's instinct is shared by all of us, that if there were a way not to have that product out there, or at any rate, we all know where we stand on plastics. It is an issue for everybody, but it may not be EPR that solves this problem. We're getting close to wrapping up. Can I just ask, just before we wrap up, are the speakers, the presenters, each of them willing to let us forward any questions we didn't get to tonight? We could email them to you or something over the next day or two.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Sure, of course.
And I think you're going to share the presentations, right? So,
Or I'd be glad to.
Starting
I think everybody except Ashley's, I guess, is
Okay.
shareable. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Sure. If
But you can
signed up-
share the bill language that we have. That's live.
Say it again. I'm sorry.
We can send the bill out.
Oh.
We put it in the chat too, but I'll make sure you guys have an updated PDF once we re-intro.
Okay. Great. Great. So each of the panelists, if you would please give us your final thoughts so we can wrap up knowing we've done a good, complete job. David, you were first presenter. You want to be the first to conclude? No, said David.
Oh, sorry. I saw a message pop up, but I didn't hear a question to me, but I guess there was one. So Brendan, maybe you could just.
Just we're wrapping up. Is there a minute or so that you'd like to share with people before we do to sign off? That's all.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, I mean, first of all, I am grateful to be invited to be a part of this conversation that you're having. I think it's a really important one, and one that you're not alone in having. There are communities and states all across North America that are having this conversation right now. And, you know, looking at how do you tackle the amount of material that isn't getting properly recycled, the cost of that to communities, how do you make the system easier for residents to participate in? And how do you create links between the cost and the performance obligations and what producers are putting into the market? I think what I'm hearing is you're well down that path and ahead of many in the conversation. There's a very ambitious bill that's been drafted great to hear about that.
Yep.
And something that we will continue to be watching and seeing what happens in your state. So thanks again.
Thank you, David. Ashley, you want to say something? Since we called your name, you can respond.
Yeah, so no, I just wanted to thank everyone for their interest and, especially in EPR. It is a, important policy, and we're very, the senators very
Lost
excited to
you.
bring, we would like to encourage everyone to try and, contact their local representative and tell them about EPR, maybe a little love on EPR, and, really try to either get co-sponsorships or support around the legislation, because it is a big change in New York that we think will have a lot of good on many different levels.
It'd be great for New York to be a leader here. Maybe we could
We
lead
could be
by
first.
a new name or acronym for EPR. I don't know.
I don't know, but we could be first if everyone helps get us there together.
Yes. Kate, you want to go with a summing up, and then we'll go to Tom and finish, I think. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I just want to thank the SWAB for hosting this discussion on this really important topic, and also just remind everyone who's on the SWAB that you're really leaders in your communities and among your friends and neighbors. And this is kind of an esoteric topic, and I think part of it is the name. I'll go back to that again, but tell your friends and neighbors what EPR is. They probably would be really interested. I know that whenever I start talking about waste with anyone, I end up having an hour-long conversation. So, I would just say spread the word about the policy just so people can be educated and hopefully support it.
And
thanks
as
so much for having
esoteric
me.
and odd as it looks to, what was the percentage you mentioned for electronics take back earlier?
60% reduction.
Think about that. I think people will be stunned to hear that. They didn't even know that this was a successful program, and it's more than just successful. It's really quite, so
Yeah.
I think it's a conversation worth having.
Absolutely.
Once we've finished with the branding consultant who tells us.
Exactly. Thanks.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah. Hi, Brendan. Yeah, I mean, I would reiterate, what Kate and Ashley said. I mean, I spent many, many years on the Manhattan SWAB and the Citywide Recycling Advisory Board. And I think one of the significant strengths of those organizations is their influence on local city with their local elected representatives, and really use that voice you have. Ashley, I'm sure, can tell you her boss can use friends and supporters in Albany. And this is going to happen in the U.S. It's going to happen either first in Vermont or Maine or Oregon. And I, for one, would like to see New York lead the charge. So it's an exciting possibility.
I agree. We have nowhere to go but up after all. So we could be there well, anyway, it's all been said. New York was very important in terms of municipal recycling, period, curbside recycling, residential recycling, and now maybe for EPR, whatever that is, or whatever we finally decide to call it. Thank you, Tom. That's good. Is there anything else, Kathy, Kendall, the organizers today, Cullen, that we should say for the good and welfare? This has been a wonderful session, I believe. But I don't want to leave anything else. Go, Kathy.
Sorry, Brendan, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
I just wanted to say this has been really terrific, and I wanted to say thanks again to all of our presenters and to everyone who helped put this event together, and for everyone who attended.
Right.
Thank you.
And it's
And
a great,
get in touch really soon.
it was great that was jointly operated by Brooklyn and Manhattan SWAB, showing that there can be peace and brotherhood.
Hey, Kathy, you want to mention the Manhattan SWAB event tomorrow evening?
Oh, good for you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for reminding me, Kendall. Actually, Kara has a slide that she can put up. There is an event tomorrow that Manhattan SWAB is organizing. It's right here on the screen. And I will be forwarding to our speakers some of the questions that we didn't get to tonight, if you wouldn't mind just having a look and answer whichever ones you choose. Thank you.
Very good.
Oh, and also we will be posting the recording on our website, and I will share that that link when we have it. Thanks again.
The recording of the whole session will be available through our website. Okay, and the Brooklyn SWAB website. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Obviously the panelists, but the participants as well. The wonderful staffing that was done, all very ad hoc. I really appreciate Kendall and Kathy and people, Cullen, for jumping in and making this happen. And I guess that's about it. Everybody stay well. Don't cough on your neighbor. Don't touch your face. Wash your hands. Everybody be well, and thank you for attending. Good night. Good night.
Good night.